Welcome to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast, your go-to resource for all things tennis coaching. Your host is Steve Whelan. Here, we dive deep into ecological dynamics and constraint-led coaching practices. Whether you're a seasoned coach or just starting out, this podcast is designed to build your confidence, expand your knowledge, and refine your techniques. Join me as we challenge traditional methods, explore player-centered approaches, and transform your coaching experience. Let's take your coaching game to the next level together. Stay tuned for insightful discussions and practical tips that will make a real difference on and off the court.
And welcome, as always, to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Whelan. Last Sunday, I was very fortunate to attend the PTR UK Coaches Conference, in which I delivered a 45-minute presentation on transitioning red players to orange stage players. And a big part of my presentation was just how we get red so wrong. And in today's podcast, I want to discuss 4 things and why I believe they do more harm than good. And it's based on my personal experience. And obviously, I watch a lot of tennis lessons. I educate a lot of tennis coaches. And I still see these things in place because, again, they're very traditional. And there's probably valid reasons in coaches' minds why they do these things. But I'm just going to talk through why I believe we set red up so back to front. And then we see the effect when the players transition to orange. They can't meet the demands of the game. And what happens? Players stop coming and we lose players. And you can see that in the numbers. Players drop off from red to orange is quite big. It's even bigger orange to green, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a future podcast as well. But very similar reasons, which we're going to discuss today. So reason number 1 is the focus on isolated or static stroke development. So when I first started coaching, a very common theme for coach programs, coach syllabuses was forehand week 1, backhand week 2, volley week 3, serve week 4, maybe the return week 5, and then competition week 6. So each week you had the shot of the week. And if you're an 80s child like me, it's a bit like a villain of the week. Like each week there's a different task to accomplish. And you may think, well, great, like you really focus in on one shot. The issue is with that, well, if I miss week 1, I'm not going to learn any forehands then until week 7 of a new term. I also might attend week 2 on the back end, but then I might not hit many backhands over the next few weeks because I'm hitting volleys, and then I'm hitting serves, I'm hitting returns, which might involve a few backhands, and then hopefully in competition I'll hit a few backhands. But we put a lot of emphasis on just a single shot. And we'll get onto this a little bit later on, but learning takes quite a long time. I'm not going to learn a shot in a lesson. It just doesn't work that way. And how we learn the shots as well. So again, there's a misconception at Red that we need to teach these fundamentals. We've got to teach the basic shapes. So what do? We isolate the drill, we drop feed, we hand feed, we get the player standing still. We throw them ball after ball. They hit 20, 30 forehands in a row. And the idea is that repetition will then hopefully develop the skill. We understand that it will develop the skill of standing still and hitting the ball. When you put that player in an open, more dynamic situation, it breaks down and it just doesn't transfer very well. And I've seen this as a coach. I'd spend hours and hours working on a forehand. I put the player into an open situation, a game situation, and the forehand disappears. It's a different skill because the player has to use the perception action coupling. And just by dropping the ball for the player, they don't read information very well and they don't transfer it into action very well. And it definitely doesn't transfer into an open situation. So we need to move away from that. And that brings me on to point number 2. So point number 2, we try and get as many players as possible on the red court because you can get 4 mini courts on a large tennis court, on normal size tennis court. One company I used to work for did want to try and have 6 mini nets on the court. The idea is, you get more people in. More people means more income. But the issue is tennis isn't played in a half court. So players might get pretty good at playing in a quite narrow thin half court. But then when you open it up into a full court situation, again, it doesn't transfer because you've got a wider field of perception. You're going to have to move much more. Therefore, the perception action skill comes into consideration again. What we have to remember is the red court's designed for this age and stage of player to play on their own. They are capable of playing in a full red court on their own. And I think sometimes, and again, maybe this is a fault of coach education, if players can't do it straight away, we straight away start to narrow space. And we believe that making the space smaller will make it easier. Goes back to the isolated training. The issue is, again, they become really good in that isolated space, but once you open the space up, it doesn't transfer. So what we have to do as coaches is we have to allow it to be messy and chaotic. And I think sometimes we don't allow that enough, and we just try and get as many kids on court as possible to make money, to commercialize the business. At the end of the day, I've said this before on the podcast, but yes, I understand that we're all self-employed. Generally, we need to generate income, or we work for a company and they want to generate income. So again, they just think about participation, more kids, more money. The downside is that has a huge effect on player development because kids are learning to play tennis in a quite restricted position. And again, for those of you who play tennis, and most of you will if you listen to this podcast, like hitting the ball down the line from behind the baseline is a very challenging shot. The angle's quite narrow. The net's at its highest point. There's a reason why the majority of pro tennis players hit the ball cross court and push deep behind the baseline. Angle's bigger, net's lower, space is bigger. So we're actually making it more difficult by getting them to hit down the line. That has a huge knock-on effect as well. Point number 3 is we normally give the inexperienced coach the red stage tennis. Again, the mindset is, well, that they're beginners, so they don't know any better. So if you put the inexperienced coach in, they're not going to get found out as much. But then you've got an inexperienced coach with no experience, no knowledge, or limited knowledge of coaching at this point, just qualified. And then you've got inexperienced players with no knowledge how to play the game. So you've got these two inexperienced people trying to work it out together. And I really believe that you've got to put your experienced coaches in the red, because red's a challenging age group. They've got low attention spans. So psychologically, they're still growing at quite a rapid rate as well, because you're going to have massive differentiation between 2 6-year-olds. They're still learning a lot about themselves. They're still developing physically. So again, you're going to have different rates of physical development and really rapid growth spurts as well. 1 minute, Steve can hit a perfect shot. He goes away for a week, he has a growth spurt, and then he's all discoordinated and his body hasn't calibrated yet to the extra inch or so, and it looks weird. And again, an inexperienced coach will panic with that and go straight to the technique, whereas an experienced coach like myself would look at it and go, well, just a growth spurt, be okay in a couple of weeks. Once the body finds its calibration and works out that extra inch and how to use it efficiently and effectively, it'll be fine. So then you have the inexperienced coach in there, and even with the 2 points that I made ahead there, the isolated and shot of the week and large numbers, like an inexperienced coach won't see the effect that will have on the game. I don't think it's very fair that we put inexperienced coaches in. And even within coach education, a lot of the entry-level coach qualifications is based on blue stage or red stage. To me, they're the most difficult stages because you're dealing with the physical and psychological development stages there, which is so rapid. You're probably best putting your inexperienced coaches in with older players who are a bit more developed physically and psychologically, because then they don't have to deal with as much variability. That's just my opinion. A lot of experienced coaches, once they get some experience or some authority, they become a head coach, they try and get rid of the blue stage and red stage because it is tough, it is challenging. But I don't believe that's right. Again, that's just my personal opinion. And the last bit, and it kind of ties it all in together, just expectations. So let's start with coach expectations. Coaches, again, have this real fear of time. They believe that if someone's paying you £40, £50, $50 for a lesson, you've got to improve them in an hour. If someone's paying you $10, £10 for a group lesson, you've got to improve something in that hour. You've got to make an impact straight away. But learning takes time. You can't learn how to play tennis in an hour. And a great sort of point made by David Wilson this week at the PTR UK Coaches Conference, who spoke really well, was you don't learn how to play tennis in your lessons. You gain the knowledge, and then later on, when you play tennis, that's where you actually learn how to play. And in my lessons now, especially, I don't want to see these quick progresses. Because to me, if it's really instant progress, then one, I probably haven't picked the right thing to work on because the player can already do it. Or two, the situation's too simple, too easy, and the player's achieved it too quick. I want the player to struggle a little bit in terms of trying to find solutions. And coaches always push back at me and say, yeah, but I've only got them for an hour or even 45 minutes. I've got them once a week. You don't have to improve them in that hour a week. You hopefully will have them for at least 6 weeks. And the idea is to get them a little bit better in those 6 weeks. So they feel that they're progressing, so they sign on for next time. And if you're really good at your job, you're going to have them for a couple of years, maybe 4, 5, 6, 10 years time. So there's no rush. There's no rush to try and fit everything into 6 weeks. There's no rush to try and fit everything into a single lesson. And learning looks messy. It looks chaotic. When you go to a school playground at lunchtime or break time, just look at it. It's nuts. It's crazy. It's chaotic. The kids are playing games. They're exploring different things. They're learning loads of different things. Our lessons need to look a bit more like that. Our lessons need to look messy and chaotic. I want the kids to explore tennis and have fun and explore multiple ways in which to play the game. And that then comes to the parents' expectations of what tennis coaching looks like. Parents believe that tennis coaching is the coach, person of authority, tells the players what to do, feeds them the ball, they hit the repetitive movements, and they get better at hitting shots, get better at the technique. That means you get better at tennis. And that means regimented, structured, almost military kind of drills where the players line up and they are shadow swinging and stuff like that. That's not how learning movement's done. And we've talked about this on the podcast before. It's different. When you're learning a dynamic movement sport like tennis, you need to learn multiple skills. You need to learn forehand, backhand, volley, serve, return serves, drop shot, slice, topspin, flat, every single lesson. And with that then comes lots of variability, but then also lots of chaos. And we have to explain that to the parents. That's the reality of the game. The reality of the game is you need multiple skills. And goes back to the time issue as well. We've got time. These kids, especially at Red, 6 and 7, hopefully they're playing tennis for 10, 20, 30 years. There's no rush. And what you'll see with a lot of kids is the progress in terms of visually when you can see it always coincides with physical progress when they have a bit of a growth spurt. I was in the coaches meeting the other week and we discussed some player progress, and the players that were standing out were all just growing quicker than their peers. So you look at them and think, oh my God, they're really improving in the tennis. And my point was, yeah, but look at them. Physically, they've changed quicker than their peers. And that therefore looks like they're improving at tennis, which is true. But physically, they're improving. And also emotionally and psychologically, they're developing quicker as well because their body's growing compared to their peers who maybe not quite at that sort of development stage yet. But what might happen now is the player might plateau out. And then the younger player who's not physically developed as quick will then go past them. And it's just constant backwards and forwards of development. But that's okay. And that's where parents get really, I think, lost because they'll look at each other. They'll look at other players and they'll compare their child to someone else. Oh, we're watching such and such and they were improving loads. We need to catch up to them. And I'm like, just hold on. Look at them physically. They're physically developing quicker. We can't speed up the physical development of your child. Just relax. It's okay. It's no rush. Like we have no idea what's going to happen when they hit puberty or maturity. Let's just relax. We're only at red stage tennis. It just, again, we talk about long-term player development. It's like, let's just chill. It's like we can't have a huge impact on how players physically develop. But what we do have an impact on is how players learn how to play the game, this red stage. Therefore, we need to get rid of the isolated and static strokes. We've got to allow them to explore the full red court. We've got to allow them to explore the serve, the return, the forehands, the backhands, the slice, the drop shots. Everything in a single lesson. We've got to ensure that our coaches at Red understand that. And if you do put your younger coaches in there, explain that to them. A lot of younger coaches at Red, they feel a lot of peer pressure from head coaches. And what tends to happen a lot, I'm seeing this more and more, they'll teach the Reds like the head coach is teaching the yellow because they believe that's what good coaching is. They're two different ages and stages. We have to change that mentality. But that's where a good head coach will mentor the younger coach and go, listen, this is red. This is not yellow. If they're coming once a week, we've got to make them play tennis as much as we can for that 45 minutes. And we've got to allow them to understand it's a safe space and it's okay to make mistakes, and mistakes are quite important. And it's not about hitting the perfect forehand. It's about, okay, can you play your shots in these situations? Can you find ways to win? Can you find ways to survive? That's what this stage should look like. It should be chaotic. It should be fun. And it should be a space of exploration for these young players. I don't believe it should be a lesson. I believe it should be a tennis experience. Our job as coaches is not to give players solutions, it's to provide problems, provide situations, and let the player find ways to adapt. And for doing this approach now for the past 4 years, my players love it. And a lot of feedbacks to my head coach and from parents is they really have fun in Steve's lessons. And that's just not because I'm playing silly games. It's because I'm allowing them autonomy. I'm empowering them to explore and express themselves and find their own ways. They're learning how to play the game implicitly. I'm not telling them. And a lot of coaches can't understand that because they see it as, well, I've got to tell, I've got to be an authority, I've got to be explicit and teach. And then we wonder why we have so many players drop off from red to orange. We wonder why only 10% of our club program can actually play tennis. Again, great quote from David Wilson yesterday was when he asked kids, how often do you play tennis? Or once a week. Or what's that? Or have a lesson. No, but when do you play tennis? Once a week. Coaching is not playing tennis. Coaching is learning how to play tennis, but it's not playing tennis. And it's a huge impact. And again, something I've talked about a lot. Like, we need these kids to play tennis, not to have coaching. Coaching's going to help. Coaching's going to hopefully unlock potential, if you want to use that word. It's going to fast track them a little bit. But you learn tennis by just playing tennis. And we're losing that. And I touched upon this in a podcast a few weeks ago with pickleball. Why is pickleball so popular, in my opinion? Because you can just play it. You don't have to have lessons. You don't have to go and spend more money on coaches. And that's why adults are loving it, because you can just go and play. And it'd be interesting what happens with pickleball over the next couple of years, whether or not coaches flood that market and then it becomes a commercial business like red tennis is. Red tennis now, I call it battery farming for tennis. Get as many kids on court. Let's pretend, that's the wrong word, but let's try and teach them something. So we're trying to justify getting paid. But then when you go into these sessions, these kids can't play tennis. And they may have all the answers, like, okay, low to high and finish over my shoulder and split step. but they won't be able to do it. So 4 things we need to think about when coaching red players. Hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. These are going to be exclusive podcasts now. I'm changing my YouTube. So YouTube is now going to be a bit more like a video blog. So if you head over to My Tennis Coaching on YouTube, I'm going to be uploading daily videos about my coaching journey. And there'll be daily reflection videos. It's going to be quite raw. It'll be me either sat at home in my office discussing topics of the day, topics of the week. I maybe sat in my car, maybe on court, but just going through what it's like being a tennis coach and a tennis coach educator, and sharing challenges, sharing problems, sharing successes. And I'm going to be sharing player journeys and lesson videos and stuff as well. So the podcast now is going to go once a week, probably on a Friday, and it'll just be like a general topic that I'm sort of exploring of the week. And then we're going to have daily video content, quite short term, maybe 4 or 5 minutes at a time, over on YouTube. So if you are interested in that, please head over to YouTube and subscribe and hit the bell notification. If you like the podcasts, please subscribe. Try and leave a review if you can. It just helps the podcast get out. Podcasts are really difficult for numbers, and I'm going to put a bit of time into the podcast. You've obviously heard the new intro and outro. We're going to get some guests that are going to be podcast exclusive as well. So if you do enjoy the podcast, if you listen to them on the way to work, or if you listen to them when you're just sort of having some downtime, just share a little bit of love, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and it just helps me because obviously I'm putting some time and effort into these. And when you see quite low listener numbers, it's a bit worrying. But even if I get 2 people listening, I'm helping 2 people, 2 coaches think a little bit differently about their coaching, then it's a win. But if I can get out to more coaches and into more coaches' minds, that would be really great as well. Thanks for listening, and speak to you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more insightful discussions and valuable tips to enhancing your coaching journey. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at My Tennis Coaching for daily inspiration, coaching advice, and behind-the-scenes content. Stay connected, stay inspired, and keep pushing the boundaries of your coaching skills. Until next time, keep fostering growth, innovation, and excellence on and off the court. See you in the next episode.